While in Mexico filming Wagons East, John Candy had a feeling something bad was going to happen. He was right, and it all started with a phone call that made his blood run cold. John Candy was the larger-than-life Canadian comedian who inspired the biggest laughs and had an even bigger heart. Throughout much of the 80s and 90s, John Candy dominated comedy and never lost sight of his humble Canadian beginnings. Candies adored him, and his fellow comedians respected him. But beneath his funny man exterior, he struggled with the weight of his success and his literal weight. Candy's story is proof that the good ones never last long. John Franklin Candy was born to make audiences laugh, or scream, as his daughter Jennifer Ann Candy put it. "I always say my dad was born in a pumpkin patch because he was born on Halloween." Even though there was nothing auspicious about his birthday, horror struck sooner rather than later in his tragically short life. When Candy was just 5 years old, he experienced a major setback in life. His working-class Catholic family suffered a terrible loss. His father, Sidney James Candy, had a heart attack at the age of just 35 and passed away. It was a saddening time, but John Candy would carry a deep sadness with him for the rest of his life. Releasing financial hardships, Candy's mother relocated the family to East York, a working-class neighborhood in Toronto. They moved into a cramped bungalow with Candy's grandparents and aunt, but Candy struggled to move on. The memory of his father loomed large over the family, and his unexpected heart attack haunted Candy. Comedy, however, proved to be an escape. Candy got into acting while attending university. At first, he scored minor roles in small productions, such as Class of '44. His real talents, however, lay in his ability to, well, not act. He found his niche in the Toronto chapter, improvisational comedy troupe, The Second City. Once he was free to be himself, his star began to shine. The Second City took their comedic talents from the stage to the silver screen in 1976. Together with breakout stars such as Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara, Candy started up the hit sketch television series Second City Television. The show, basically a Canadian version of Saturday Night Live, made Candy a household name in Canada. Taking over Hollywood, however, would not be so easy. Between 1976 and 1981, Candy continued to make a name for himself in comedy. He secured minor roles in films such as Lost and Found and The Blues Brothers, but his big break came in 1981 with the movie Stripes. His introduction to real Hollywood filmmaking, however, was almost more than his already overloaded heart could handle. In a scene where Candy's character is supposed to shave his head, Ivan Reitman hired a real barber from the Real Arms Services, but didn't tell the cast. When the barbers removed all of Candy's beloved hair, he actually became despondent. But thankfully, Candy was never one to hold a grudge. John Candy wasn't just making people laugh in front of the camera. He always had his co-stars and stitches as well. While filming Stripes, Candy invited his castmates back to his place for a spaghetti dinner and to watch a boxing match. He and fellow cast members, Conrad Dunn, then broke out into song, teaching everyone the lyrics to Do a Ditty. Ivan Reitman continued to torture Candy on the set of 1981 Stripes. One of the more challenging scenes for Candy saw his character rolling around in the mud with attractive girls in bikinis. For the humble Canadian comedian, the highly suggestive and provocative scene proved to be too uncomfortable, but eventually, Reitman talked him into it. Most comedians in Candy's position, many of whom were his friends, became obsessed with women, substances, and the hard-partying lifestyle. Candy, however, was a one-woman kind of man. He happily married in 1979 before the height of his fame, and against all odds, they remained happily married. That is, until Candy's tragic demise. As it turns out, all of the challenges that Candy faced on the set of Stripes had been worth it. Based on the success of his recent film appearances and the growing popularity of SCTV with American audiences, Candy received an opportunity that most comedians would have done anything to get. an opportunity that no one, except for him, would turn down. For comedians, there is no bigger platform than Saturday Night Live. So when SNL producers approached Candy about leaving SCTV to star in the biggest sketch comedy show of all time, his answer surprised them. Candy turned down multiple offers from SNL producers because he wanted to stay loyal to his Canadian roots. Even though he didn't join the cast of SNL full-time, Candy still made a few appearances. His first appearance came in his breakout year of 1981, but he didn't get to host the show until 1983. Seeing how rarely he appeared on SNL despite his growing popularity and fame, it seemed likely that folks over at SNL were harboring a grudge. John Candy's fellow comedian and show writer Bob Odenkirk gave fans some scandalous behind-the-scenes insights. According to Odenkirk, Candy was the most burned potential host of SNL. Almost every time that the showrunners booked the Canadian comedian to host the sketch comedy show, they would back out at the last minute. He was no stranger to disappointment. Candy starred in some of the most successful comedies of the 80s and 90s, but not the most successful one, Ghostbusters. The film's director, Ivan Reitman, originally wanted Candy for the role of the nerdy character, Louis Tully. According to Reitman, however, he didn't like the treatment that I had sent. He didn't get it. It would have been a very different movie with John Candy in it. Ghostbusters is a comedy classic, but some say that John Candy almost ruined it. He wanted Ivan Reitman to make some changes to the character of Louis Tully, explaining, well, maybe if I played him as a German guy who had a bunch of German shepherd dogs. Reitman hated the idea and ultimately passed on Candy for the role, something that he regretted until his premature demise. Candy did eventually get to bust some ghosts, just not on the big screen. He managed to swallow his pride and show his support for the film that starred many of his best friends. As a consolation prize, he appeared in the music video for Ray Parker Jr.'s hit single Ghostbusters to help promote the soundtrack for the film. As passionate as Candy was about acting and comedy, it was never really his first love. In fact, his two kids, Christopher Michael and Jennifer Ann, later revealed that Candy had some unexpected priorities in his life. According to them, Candy's priorities were in order of importance: his family, the Argonauts, and then his acting career. The question is, who exactly are the Argonauts? If Candy wasn't watching himself on television, then he was likely watching a Canadian football team, the Toronto Argonauts. Maybe the only thing that Candy loved more than comedy was football. Thankfully, his success in comedy allowed him some privileges on the football field. He actually co-owned the Toronto Argonauts with fellow Canadian legend Wayne Gretzky. Their other owner, however, seemed to love money more than winning. As co-owner, Candy led his team, the Toronto Argonauts, to victory. But when the footballers hoisted up the Grey Cup for winning the league in 1991, they forgot to thank John Candy. The CFL only etched Candy's and Gretzky's fellow co-owner Bruce McNall into the trophy. John Candy and Wayne Gretzky's names were nowhere to be seen. This was a mistake they didn't correct until 2007, more than a decade after John Candy passed away. Millions of fans knew that he was a larger-than-life figure. Quite literally. This is why it's hard to imagine that John Candy was a star athlete during his high school years. By the time he entered high school, he had already developed his famous rotund figure, and it made him very self-conscious and awkward. But this did work to his advantage. Candy's friends in high school described him as a gentle giant. That is, until he stepped onto the football field, where he put his formidable and intimidating figure to good use. Candy played as an offensive tackle and fought his way to the championship game and had dreams of becoming a pro footballer. Then tragedy struck and changed the course of his life. If Candy hadn't become a famous comedian, he would have become a household name as a pro footballer. Sadly, a knee injury derailed his hopes of NFL or CFL glory, and he had to settle for co-owning the Toronto Argonauts instead of playing for them. Being the co-owner of the team, however, came with its perks. As a co-owner of the Argonauts, Candy behaved more like a member of the team than he did as sports executive. He invited the players over to his house for dinner, fretted up and down the sidelines, rushed to the field when players were injured, and even mopped the floors of the locker rooms after games. Sadly, all of his hard work came to a stunning end. Despite the challenges that he faced, Candy never lost his love for football. One former Toronto Argonaut, Michael Pinball Clemens, spoke about Candy's support for the team. He remembered Candy standing with the team in frigid weather during the Grey Cup championship game. "He's not in the press box," Clemens said. "He's down on the field with his guys, and now, all of a sudden, I'm not as cold." One of Candy's most memorable roles was as Gus Polinski in the holiday classic Home Alone. He only had a small cameo appearance alongside his SCTV co-star, Catherine O'Hara, but he very nearly stole the show from Macaulay Culkin. Despite being one of Candy's most memorable performances, it was also his least rewarding. Everyone in Hollywood knew and loved Candy for his patented Canadian generosity, because they would take advantage of it. For his cameo in Home Alone, Candy agreed to getting paid at scale. The megastar walked away from the hit film with a paltry $414 paycheck. That's less than what some of the extras made. Candy might have turned down a big payday from Home Alone, but he hadn't always been so generous. The Canadian comedian only had a small cameo appearance in 1983's National Lampoon's Vacation, but there was nothing small about the check that he cashed. For that tiny cameo, Candy earned a cool $1 million. Where he spent that money might surprise you. Candy was worth every cent of that $1 million payday. Audiences hadn't cared for the initial ending of the movie. So fellow SCTV star Harold Ramis called in Candy to do his famous Canadian security guard character. The cameo ending practically made the movie. Candy's cameo in National Lampoon's Vacation was so wildly hilarious that it even inspired a theme park in real life. Wally World Water Park opened in London, Ontario, a few years after the film's release. The park's owner wanted Candy to appear at the park's opening, but unlike the film's producer, they couldn't afford Candy. Unfortunately, he needed more cash for a terrible habit he had picked up. In a jaw-dropping revelation on sensational YouTube series Reunited Apart, audiences learned something shocking about their beloved John Candy. Candy, in an uncharacteristic turn of events, arrived late to the set of 1984's Splash, holding up the entire production. His excuse shocked everyone. When Candy finally arrived on set, he begged Ron Howard for forgiveness and confessed the truth. He hadn't slept a wink, and he was admittedly still inebriated from the previous night. He'd had a chance encounter with none other than the legendary Jack Nicholson at a local bar. Nicholson, who recognized Candy, had given the Canadian comedian drinks all night. The drinks, however, had just been the evening's appetizer. Candy hadn't been able to contain himself the previous night, and Nicholson had done little to restrain him. "But I've got to go shoot," Candy explained to him. But Nicholson, cool as a cucumber, responded, "You're going to be all right, kid. Don't worry about it." But it turns out Nicholson had been right. Candy nailed his scene that day in a single brilliant take. It turns out he might have had a little bit of help from a certain illegal substance. Unfortunately, Candy's meteoric rise to fame had a secret ingredient. And here's a hint. It's white and powdery, and it's definitely not Canadian snow. At the height of his fame, Candy reflected on the wild days that had taken him from Canadian television to Hollywood cinemas. "The next thing I knew, I was in Chicago, where I learned how to drink, stay up into the wee hours, and spell drugs. Candy did everything in excess, and often turned to food as a coping mechanism for stress. He also had a far more dangerous, shall we say, smokier habit. And by the time he was a teenager, Candy was already smoking a whole pack of cigarettes every day. Combined with his food and other addictions, Candy was living life in the fast lane. but he got a wake-up call before he crashed. Candy's deep friendship with his comedy idol, John Belushi, blossomed during their early careers at Second City. They enjoyed as many jokes as they did wild nights out. Tragically, in March 1982, however, Belushi succumbed to a fatal overdose. The loss hit Candy profoundly due to their shared struggles with weight and unhealthy habits. It was also a reminder of his own father's untimely demise. According to Martin Nelman's biographical work, Laughing on the Outside, The Life of John Candy, Belushi's passing was a sobering event for Candy. Fellow actor Dan Hennessy revealed that Candy interpreted it as a wake-up call, prompting him to break ties with the substances that were destroying his health and focus on his career. But the damage, sadly, was already done. Following Belushi's tragic passing, Candy cleaned up his act. But it took him a long time to sober up. The loss of his dear friend sent him into a severe depression. His friend, John Stalker, revealed that Belushi's passing forced Candy to withdraw from the world, and he became a recluse. But thankfully, eventually, his sense of humor returned, stronger than ever before. As a Canadian, Candy lived up to his reputation of being a nice guy. When he starred alongside Tom Lister Jr. in 1985's Armed and Dangerous, Lister Jr. had nothing but nice things to say about the comedian. He called him the best human being he had ever met. And he wasn't kidding. Brian Grazer, the producer behind Armed and Dangerous, made a sensational but also deeply touching revelation about Candy during his appearance on a podcast. Grazer unveiled that Candy's character, Frank Dooley, was supposed to hurl an insult at Meg Ryan's character, Maggie Cavanaugh, in the film Armed and Dangerous. But Candy didn't have a bad bone in his body. Candy didn't merely fume in silence, he bravely confronted the film's original director, Mark Lester. He expressed his disapproval of the line and flat-out refused to refer to Ryan with obscenities, even if only for the camera. Lester, infuriated, resigned on the spot, leaving Grazer no choice but to step in and direct. It was a Hollywood twist for the ages, but ultimately, Candy's heart was just too big. All throughout his life and career, Candy struggled with his weight and was haunted by the specter of his father's untimely demise. However, despite his best efforts, Candy couldn't keep the weight off. According to People magazine, he hovered around 275 pounds for most of his life, but frequently tipped the scales at more than 300 pounds. In a serendipitous encounter that preceded his rise to stardom, a young Harvard undergraduate named Conan O'Brien, yes, that Conan O'Brien, crossed paths with Candy. During a 1984 visit to Harvard, the campus entrusted O'Brien with the unique responsibility of serving as Candy's guide. According to O'Brien, however, he served more as Candy's guard. At the time, Candy was following a strict diet where he only ate whole foods. In a funny twist, O'Brien had the challenging task of trying to keep Candy away from, well, Candy. Despite his best efforts, however, he couldn't keep the Canadian comedian away from a famous pastry emporium on campus. To be fair, discipline was never in Candy's genes, but unfortunately, heart disease was. Candy always struggled with his weight, and with diet and exercise regimens meant to help him control it. Case in point, the film Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Fellow funny man Steve Martin claimed that Candy brought a ton of exercise equipment with him to the set of the film. However, despite his best intentions, Candy never used any of it. Candy managed to outlive his father, who passed at 35 years old. But as the milestone of 40 approached, he faced a tumultuous battle with his inner demons. Stricken with sudden panic attacks, he resorted to self-medication through excessive eating, triggering a rapid surge in his weight. It all turned sour when his weight became the punchline. For Candy, the tipping point came at the 1992 Canadian Genie Awards. After he agreed to host the award show, a tasteless joke made him reconsider. The show's organizer promoted the ceremony with the tagline, featuring Candy as a host. We got the biggest star we could find. Devastated and embarrassed, Candy backed out of hosting the award show. But he was about to lose a lot more than just a hosting gig. Throughout his own personal health struggles, Candy would also look to his co-ownership of the Toronto Argonauts for encouragement. But on the set of his final film, Wagons East, he would receive the most devastating news of his life. After their 1991 championship, the Argonauts began to hemorrhage away money, more than Candy could afford. Candy was deep in the heart of Mexico, filming Wagons East when his world came crashing down. Amid the desert landscapes and dressed in character with a rugged beard and grand cowboy hat, he received a call from his fellow Toronto Argonauts co-owner, Bruce McNow. Sadly, it was not good news for the avid football fan. Bob Crane Jr., who was on the set that day that Candy received the call, remembers Candy's reaction. "I wouldn't go so far as to say the color went out of his face. But it was close." Crane Jr. said McNow had phoned Candy to say that he had sold the Argonauts right from under him in an effort to shore up their losses. Evidently, losing his beloved football team was more than his heart could bear. For exclusive perks like early access to new videos, priority replies to your comments, and to have your say on future content, consider becoming a FactorNape member. On top of that, your support helps keep the channel going. Click the link in the description for more details. Candy had bad feelings about Wagons East and going to Mexico long before he received that dreadful call. His former SCTV co-star and good friend, Catherine O'Hara, recalled a chilling conversation she had with him shortly before he departed. O'Hara claimed that Candy told her he didn't want to go because he felt something bad was going to happen there. Losing his football team was just the beginning of his bad trip. After knocking repeatedly, one of Candy's aides on the set of Wagons East entered his trailer only to make a shocking discovery. John Candy's lifeless body. Devastated from losing his football team and scarred from his years of heavy partying and excessive eating, Candy's oversized heart finally gave out. In the end, the famed comedian had likely suffered the same fate as his father, a heart attack, but he had a funny way of saying goodbye. Thankfully, Candy had spoken with his family the night before his unexpected demise, but he still wanted to say goodbye from the grave. The day that he passed away, a massive amethyst he had brought back from Mexico for his family suddenly fractured into pieces. His family, his wife, and 2 surviving children took it as a sign that he had passed. Acting was not John Candy's first choice of a career, but in the end, Candy found his calling in comedy and never looked back. "I think I may have become an actor to hide from myself," he once said. You can escape into a character,